People always ask me about the danger. That's the first thing. They see the bearskin, the red tunic, the rifle, and they imagine some film. They imagine a man standing there waiting for something terrible to happen, waiting to be a hero. I'll tell you the truth, because I'm old now, and the truth is the only thing I've got left worth giving anyone. The hardest enemy I ever faced in that uniform wasn't a man. It wasn't a weapon. It was the clock. It was the slow, dripping, endless nothing of a long shift in the cold, when your knees have stopped talking to you and your eyes are dry, and the same family of tourists keeps walking past for the fourth time, and the only thing moving in the whole world is the second hand on a watch you can't even look at. That's the enemy, boredom, stillness, the kind that gets inside your skull and starts whispering. And the strange part, the part nobody believes, is that the worst day of my life began as the most boring shift I'd ever pulled. Let me take you back. I was 23. I'd been in the foot guards for a little under 3 years by then, and I thought I knew everything. You always think that at 23. I'd done the parades, the state openings, the long marches in wool that weighs a ton when it rains. I'd learned how to stand. People laugh when I say that, learned how to stand, but it's a real thing. Standing still, properly still, for 2 hours straight, that's a skill you build the way a runner builds lungs. You learn to lock your knees without locking them, because if you truly lock them, the blood pools and you faint. You learn to breathe low and slow. You learn to let your mind go somewhere far away while your body stays exactly where the Queen's regulations say it should be. That morning was a London morning. You know the kind. Gray, but not raining yet. The sky looked like an old bedsheet. There was that smell in the air, the wet pavement, diesel, faint coffee smell that means you're near the center of the city. The flag was up. The crowd was already forming behind the railings, the way it always did, cameras lifted, kids on shoulders, a man in a yellow jacket somewhere telling people to mind the gap and stay behind the line. I remember the cold most of all, not a sharp cold, a patient one. It came up through the soles of my boots from the stone, slow, like water finding its way into a basement. My mate was on the box beside me. Well, not beside, you understand. The posts are set apart but close enough that I knew he was there. His name was Callum. Big lad from up north, ears that stuck out under the bare skin, terrible singing voice that he'd use in the guardroom to torture the rest of us. Out on post he was a different man, carved out of the same gray stone as the building behind us. You'd never have known he was the same fool who couldn't hold a tune. We'd nodded at each other before we marched on. That's all you get, a nod. After that, you're alone, even with 1,000 people watching you. That's the secret nobody tells you about the job. You are never more alone than when you are most watched. The tourists came in waves. There was a school group, French I think, kids in matching caps, a teacher counting heads. There was an old American couple, the husband filming everything on his phone, even the pavement, even me blinking. There were 2 girls who stood right at the railing and tried to make me laugh. They always try. They pull faces, they tell jokes, they wave. One of them sang a little bit of a pop song at me badly, and her friend filmed it, and they both fell about laughing. I didn't move. You don't move. That's not arrogance and it's not coldness. It's the whole point. The stillness is the message. The stillness says this place stands no matter what you do, no matter who you are, no matter what's funny today. We were here before you. We'll be here after. But inside, I was bored out of my skull. I'll be honest with you. I was thinking about my breakfast. I was thinking about whether I'd left the immersion heater on in the flat I shared with 2 other lads in a damp building near the barracks. I was thinking about a girl called Sophie who I'd taken to the pictures twice and who hadn't yet decided if she liked me. I was running through the football scores in my head. I was doing anything at all, to fill the hours, because the hours were vast and empty and they wanted to swallow me. That's what I mean about the enemy. A young soldier dreams of action. He imagines the moment he proves himself. And then he gets the job, and the job is mostly waiting, and the waiting is harder than he ever imagined, because you can train a man to charge, but you can't easily train a man to do nothing well. Doing nothing well is the hardest discipline there is. Around 11, my legs had gone from cold to that deep ache that means you've stopped feeling your feet and now your shins are doing the complaining for them. A pigeon had taken an interest in the buckle of my boot and kept coming back to it, hopeful, as if I might at any moment produce a sandwich. The school group had moved on. New tourists had taken their place. The gray bedsheet sky hadn't moved an inch. And there was a man. I want to be careful here because for years afterward people wanted me to say I knew. They wanted me to say I had a feeling, a sense, the hairs on the back of my neck. The films always have that. The hero who somehow knows. I didn't know, that's the honest truth. I noticed him the way you notice anyone who breaks the pattern, and a guard's whole job when you strip away the ceremony is pattern. You stand in one place for 2 hours and your eyes, even while your head stays fixed, are reading the crowd, not consciously. You're so bored that you start cataloging people. That family's been passed twice. That bloke's arguing on the phone. That woman dropped her glove and didn't notice. And this man, he didn't fit. He was standing too still. Now think about that. Of all people to notice another man's stillness, it was me, because stillness was my entire trade. The tourists were never still. They bounced, they shuffled, they pointed, they checked their phones, they moved their weight from foot to foot. Living people are restless. That's how you know they're alive. This man stood like he was on a box too. He was maybe 40. Dark jacket, zipped right up to the throat though it wasn't that cold. A bag over one shoulder, not a rucksack, a satchel kind of thing held close to his body with one hand resting flat on top of it. He had a beard going gray at the chin. And he wasn't looking at me or at the palace or at the changing of anything. He was looking down the road, towards the park, towards the trees and the open green and the path where on a normal day you'd see joggers and dog walkers and prams. He was looking at it the way you look at a clock you're waiting on. I noticed him and then I did what you do. I let my eyes drift on, because I was a guard, not a policeman, and there were policemen, real ones with the right training and the right radios dotted around. There was an officer of the law not 40 feet from the man, a tall woman in the high-vis doing her slow walk along the railing. It wasn't my job. My job was the post. My job was to not move. So I moved my attention on. The pigeon, the American with his phone, the 2 girls gone now, replaced by a family with a pram. And then a small thing happened that I have never forgotten, and that I have turned over in my head 10,000 times in the years since. The man with the satchel looked at his watch. He didn't glance at it. He looked at it. He turned his wrist up and held it there, the way you do when you are counting down, and then he looked back at the park, and then back at his watch, and his jaw moved like he was talking to himself or praying or counting. And the cold that had been climbing my legs all morning suddenly wasn't in my legs anymore. It was in my chest. I still didn't know. I want to keep saying that because I don't want to be the kind of old man who builds himself a legend. I didn't know what was in the bag. I didn't know who he was. I had no proof of anything. I had a bored man's catalog of a crowd and one face in it that didn't move right and a wrist turned up at a watch. But something in me had woken up. The whisper in my skull had stopped whispering about breakfast and Sophie and the immersion heater. Everything in me had gone quiet and sharp, the way the air goes before a storm. I could not move. You understand that. I want you to really understand that because everything that mattered hangs on it. I was on post. There were 1,000 people watching. I had a rifle that was not loaded for the crowd, that was never loaded for the crowd, that was a symbol more than a weapon in that moment. I could not break ranks and run at a man because I had a feeling. If I was wrong, and I had no reason to think I was right, I would have caused a panic in a packed square. I would have started the very stampede that hurts people. I would have ended my career and shamed my regiment over a man who was, for all I actually knew, just waiting for his wife. So I did the only thing I could do. I looked at Callum. You learn in that job to talk without talking. We all do. A flick of the eyes, the smallest turn. You can't shout across the forecourt, you can't wave, but you find ways. I cut my eyes towards the man with the satchel and held them there, hard, longer than any drifting glance, and I held them there until I swear I felt it, the way you feel someone's eyes on the back of your neck, until I felt Callum follow my line. And then I cut my eyes towards the policewoman. It took everything I had. My whole body was screaming to break, to move, to do something with these hands that had been trained to do so much, and were now allowed to do nothing at all. The bearskin was suddenly heavy as a stone on my head. The wool tunic was a furnace and an ice bath at the same time. My heart was going like a drum, and I knew that if I let any of it reach my face, the crowd would read it, because a crowd reads a guard the way sailors read the sea. The moment one of us cracks, they all feel it. So I kept my face dead. I kept my body locked. I poured every screaming impulse down into the soles of my boots and out into that cold stone, and on the outside I was exactly what I had been trained to be, a man made of stillness, in front of a building that does not flinch. And down the road, the man with the satchel checked his watch one more time. I'll tell you what was going through my head in that moment, because it surprised even me, years later, when I finally let myself remember it properly. I wasn't thinking about glory. I wasn't thinking about being a hero. I was thinking about the family with the pram who were about 30 feet to the man's left, the mother bending down to tuck a blanket. I was thinking about the two girls who'd sung at me, who'd been so full of life, so loud and silly and alive, who could so easily have still been standing at that railing. I was thinking about Callum's stupid ears and his terrible singing. And I was thinking, with a kind of cold clarity I have never felt before or since, I cannot move, but I will not break. Whatever is about to happen, this post will hold. I will hold. That's the thing nobody tells you about the boredom, about the long gray hours, about the enemy that is the clock. All that stillness, all that nothing, all that learning to do nothing well, it isn't wasted time. It's the forge. Every dull hour I had ever stood was being spent, all at once in those few seconds, buying me the one thing I needed. The ability not to run. The man slipped his hand inside the satchel. And the policewoman, God bless her, wherever she is now, had started, slow and casual, with no fuss at all, to walk towards him. She'd seen it. Maybe she'd read my eyes through Callum. Maybe she was just good at her own job, better than I'll ever know, and had clocked him the same way I had. I'll never be sure. But she was moving, easy as anything, hands loose, like a woman with nowhere in particular to be, and she was closing the distance between herself and the man with the bag, and I could do nothing but stand and watch and pray and hold my post. Down towards the park, a dog barked. A child laughed somewhere behind me. The gray sky pressed down, and the second hand on the great enemy clock kept moving, the way it always does, whether you're bored or whether the whole world is about to come apart. That was the morning. That was the calm. Hold on to it, because I want you to feel how ordinary it all was, how slow, how dull, right up until it wasn't. What happened next I'll tell you in a moment, but not yet. Let the cold settle into your own legs first. Let the boredom do its work, because that's the only way you'll understand what came after. The man pulled his hand out of the satchel. I think my heart actually stopped, not in the way people say it. I mean, I felt it pause, a real beat that didn't come when it should have, a hole in the rhythm. And what was in his hand was a phone. Just a phone. He lifted it. He pointed it down the road towards the park, and he held it steady. And for one mad second I thought, you fool, you old fool, you've spent 3 years being bored half to death, and now your boredom's invented you a monster out of a tourist taking a photograph. The relief that washed through me was so strong I nearly swayed, and swaying on post is the beginning of falling, so I caught myself, locked it down, breathed low and slow the way they drilled into me. Steady, steady. The policewoman was almost on him now. 10 feet. She'd kept that easy walk, that nothing-to-see-here stroll, and she was lifting one hand, the way you do when you're about to politely ask someone a question. And the man heard her, or sensed her. I saw his head turn just slightly the way a deer's does. And the easy thing, the photograph thing, the relief, it all curdled in an instant because the second he clocked her, he moved wrong. A man taking a photo when a copper walks up gets sheepish, or annoyed, or confused. He lowers the phone, he frowns, he says something. This man flinched like he'd been burned, and his thumb moved on the screen, fast, jabbing, and his whole body coiled to run. She got a hand on his arm. I'll give her that, she was quick. She got a hand on his sleeve and said something calm. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the shape of it, the practiced easiness of someone trying to keep a lid on a thing before it boils. He twisted out of her grip. He shoved her, not a wild shove, a hard, deliberate one, 2 hands flat to her shoulder, the kind that's meant to put a person on the ground, and she went down onto the pavement, and the satchel was swinging on its strap as he turned, and he ran. He ran towards the park. And that's when the world ended. I don't have a better way to say it. There was a sound that I felt before I heard. It came up through the stone, through my dead feet, through the bones of my legs before it ever reached my ears, a thump so deep and so total that the air itself seemed to bend. And then the noise arrived, this enormous flat crack of a sound, so loud it wasn't even loud anymore. It was a thing that happened to the inside of your head, a white wall of pure noise that wiped out birdsong and traffic and laughter and everything else in the whole gray morning. Down by the trees near the path, a cloud went up, gray and black, fast climbing, leaves and dust and pieces of things I didn't let myself look at too closely. And then the screaming started. I've heard a lot of sounds in my life. I have never heard anything like the sound a happy crowd makes in the half-second it turns into a terrified one. It's not one scream. It's the sound of 1,000 separate certainties breaking at the same time. The certainty that today was an ordinary day. The certainty that they were safe. The certainty that nothing really bad ever happens to you, only to other people on the news. All of it broke at once. The crowd behind the railings became a single animal. It surged. People who'd been standing pleasant and patient a heartbeat before were now climbing over each other, grabbing children, screaming names, running in every direction and no direction. A pushchair tipped. Someone's shopping went everywhere, oranges rolling across the road like the world had decided to play a cruel joke in the middle of the horror. A man near the front was shouting one word over and over, and the word was a name. Just a name. A woman's name. And his voice cracked on it more each time. The dust was drifting up the road towards us, towards the palace, a thin gray haze that smelled of burning and something worse under the burning that I won't describe to you. And I stood on my post. I want you to sit with that, because it's the thing people have never understood, the thing that the title of this whole sad story is really about. The world had just been blown apart 40 seconds walk from where I stood. There were people on the ground down that road. There were people running past me with blood on them. Every cell in my body, every instinct a human being has, every drop of 3 million years of being an animal that runs from fire, all of it was screaming at me to move. And my orders were to hold the post. Now people hear that and they think it's monstrous. They think, you cold robot, people were dying, why didn't you drop the rifle and run to help? And I understand that, I do, but you have to understand what the post is. The palace was not empty. There were people inside who it was my job, my one and only job, to stand between and the world. And nobody on that morning knew if the bomb was the whole plan or the start of it. Nobody knew if the chaos was the point, if the screaming and the surging crowd was exactly what someone wanted, a wave of panic to wash a second man, or a third, right up to the gates while every guard in London ran the other way to help with the first. That's how those things work. That's what they teach you in among all the standing still. The first blast is sometimes only the bait. So the discipline that looks like coldness, the refusing to move, it isn't coldness. It's the opposite. It's a man holding a door shut with his whole body while everything in him wants to be on the other side of it. I held. God, I held. I have never done anything harder in my life, and I never will. I locked my knees the right way and my jaw the right way, and I kept that rifle exactly as it should be. And I let the dust drift over me and settle gray on the black of my bearskin, and I kept my eyes moving over the crowd, because now, the catalog mattered more than it ever had. Because what if there was a second man? And do you know what I found with my eyes in all that chaos? I found Callum. He hadn't moved either. Across the forecourt in the haze, in the screaming, my big daft mate from up north with the ears and the terrible voice was standing exactly as still as I was, carved from the same gray stone. And for 1 second, just one, across all that horror our eyes met. We didn't nod. There wasn't time and there wasn't need. We just knew we're holding, both of us, whatever this is the line holds here. I have had that look from one other human being in my whole life, and it was on my wedding day, and it was my wife. That's the only other time anyone has looked at me and meant as much with no words at all. Now here's the part the films would get wrong, so let me get it right. I was not the hero of that morning. The heroes were the ones who ran towards the smoke. The policewoman who'd been knocked flat, she got up. I saw her get up, blood on her face from the pavement, and she did not run away from the park. She ran into it, towards the worst of it, towards the people who needed her, talking into her radio the whole way, bringing the cavalry. There were ambulance crews there in what felt like seconds, and ordinary men and women, tourists, dads, a teenager in a football shirt, all of them down on their knees in the dust doing what little they could for strangers. There was a woman, an older woman, who I watched take off her own coat and lay it over someone on the ground and then just hold their hand and talk to them, on and on, calm, so they wouldn't be alone. Those were the heroes. Hold on to them. The world is always full of them, more than the news lets you believe. When the worst happens, you find out the truth about people, and the truth is mostly good. Mostly people run towards each other. Remember that. My job was smaller and stranger and harder to love. My job was to be the still point, to be the thing that did not run, because here is what I learned that day, what I have known in my bones ever since. In a panic, a crowd looks for an anchor. A frightened animal looks for the thing that is not frightened. And in that screaming, surging chaos, with the dust drifting and the sirens starting up, there were people, I saw them, who in the middle of running glanced at the palace and saw 2 guards standing like nothing on earth could move them, and it steadied them. Just a flicker, just enough. You can't measure that. You can't put it on a report. But I saw a man with a child in his arms, wild-eyed, about to bolt straight into the road and the traffic, glance up and see me standing there, dead calm, dust on my shoulders, not moving an inch. And I watched him decide in that flicker that if the guard wasn't running, then maybe the gates weren't where the danger was, and he turned and carried his child the other way, the safe way, away from the road. That's it. That's the whole heroism of standing still. It isn't brave the way running into smoke is brave. It's a different thing, a quieter thing, and most days nobody will ever know you did it. And on the worst day of your life, it might just be the thing that keeps one frightened father from carrying his child under the wheels of a lorry. The minutes after the blast stretched out the way time does when everything's gone wrong. Long, thick, each second its own little year. The sirens layered up, one on top of another, until the whole sky was made of them. Armed police flooded the area, real ones, the proper ones, with the gear and the training, and they moved fast and hard and professional, sealing roads, pushing the crowd back, clearing space for the ambulances. And still I held the post. They didn't stand me down. The order didn't come, not for a long time, and an order is an order. And so I stood, in the dust and the noise, in front of a building that had not flinched, being the one thing I had spent 3 boring years learning how to be. The man with the satchel, I have to tell you about him, because you'll be wondering. He didn't get far. I didn't see all of it. My eyes were on the crowd, on the gates, on my arc. But I caught pieces of it, the way you catch lightning out the corner of your eye. He ran towards the park, towards the smoke he'd made, and I think I have always thought that he expected the chaos to swallow him, to let him slip away in the panic like a stone dropped in a river. But he ran into the one thing he hadn't planned for. He ran into people who would not let him. I'll tell you the rest in a moment. The end of it and what I learned, and the thing I say now to every young soldier who tells me he can't stand the boredom of the post. But let the sirens fill the sky a little longer first. Let the dust settle gray on the shoulders of two young men standing like stone in front of a palace, holding a line that, on that morning, only they could hold. He ran into the crowd, and the crowd caught him. Not the police, not me, not Callum, ordinary people. Here's what I pieced together after from the bits I saw and the bits I was told and the things that came out later. As he bolted, the satchel still over his shoulder, his thumb still working at that phone, a man rugby tackled him. A big fellow, a tourist as it turned out, a builder from somewhere up the country who'd brought his kids down to see the changing of the guard and have a nice day out. He didn't know who the running man was. He couldn't have. But he'd seen him shove the policewoman to the ground. And then the world had exploded, and this builder put two and two together faster than thought, and he did what his body told him to do, which was to take the running man off his feet. They went down hard on the pavement, and then others piled in. A young woman knelt on the man's arm. Another fellow got the satchel off him and threw it as far from everyone as he could, not knowing what was in it, just knowing it had to go away from the children. The phone skittered across the road. By the time the armed officers reached them, 3 or 4 ordinary members of the public were holding a man down on the ground in the middle of the worst morning of all their lives, and not one of them had a single reason to do it except that it needed doing, and they were the ones who were there. That's people. That's what we are underneath when it counts. I'll go to my grave believing it because I saw it with my own eyes through the drifting dust. They took him away. There was a lot that came out later, in the weeks and months after, court and inquiries and the papers full of it, and I'll not go into all of that here because it isn't really my story to tell, and a lot of it is the kind of thing that just makes you sad and angry in equal measure. He hadn't acted entirely alone, but the others were rounded up in the days that followed. The thing he'd built had gone off early, or in the wrong place, or smaller than he'd meant. The people who know about these things said different versions of it, and that, the failure of his own evil, is the only reason the toll was what it was and not far, far worse. People died that day. I won't pretend they didn't and I won't dress it up. Good people, people who'd done nothing in their lives but come out on a gray morning to see something beautiful and old and dignified. I think about them. I think about them on the anniversary every single year, and on plenty of days that aren't the anniversary, and I will until I'm gone. But more lived than would have, because of the policewoman who got up with blood on her face and ran the wrong way for all the right reasons, and the builder who took a stranger off his feet, and the woman who gave up her coat, and 100 small acts of ordinary courage that nobody will ever write a film about. And me. They finally stood us down a long time after, marched us off proper in step. The way it's done, because even on a day like that the form is the form and there's a strange mercy in it. I remember my legs barely working. I remember the inside of the guardroom, the door closing, the noise of the sirens going muffled. I remember sitting down on a bench and my hands starting to shake, properly shake, now that there was no crowd to read them, no post to hold, no reason left to be made of stone. And I remember Callum sat down next to me, this big daft lad, and neither of us said a word for the longest time. And then he started very quietly to sing. That terrible voice of his. Some old song his nan used to sing, he told me later. Out of tune, cracking, awful. And I have never heard anything more beautiful in my life, because it meant we were still alive. It meant we were still us. It meant the stillness had ended and we were allowed, finally, to be 2 frightened young men instead of 2 statues. I cried. I'm not ashamed to tell you that. I sat in a guardroom and listened to my mate sing badly and I cried like a child, and he put his arm around me and kept singing, and that's the truth of what a hero looks like at the end of the day. Not a statue, a shaking, crying boy being held by his friend. Now, I told you at the start that I'd tell you the real enemy, and I have. The enemy is the clock. The enemy is the boredom, the gray hours, the endless standing in the cold while the second hand crawls and your own mind turns on you and whispers that this is pointless, that you're wasting your life, that nothing is ever going to happen and you're just a tourist attraction in a silly hat. Young soldiers come to me now. I'm an old man. I've earned the right to bore them, and they say it. They say it the way I used to think it. I can't stand the post. Nothing ever happens. What's the point of learning to stand still? And I tell them about that morning. I tell them what I've told you. I tell them that every dull hour they've ever stood is not wasted. It's the forge. Every gray, aching, pointless feeling shift is teaching them the one skill that no enemy can take and no metal can measure. The ability to hold when every part of you wants to break. The ability to be the still point in someone else's worst moment. The discipline that looks from the outside like coldness, and is in fact the warmest, hardest kind of love there is, the love that stays at the door so that others can run for safety, the love that does not flinch so that the frightened can find something to steady themselves against. The world is full of people who can run towards the fire. Thank God for them. We need them. They are the bravest souls alive. But there's another kind of courage, and the world needs it just as badly, and almost nobody understands it. It's the courage to stay. To hold your ground when holding it is harder than charging. To do nothing, and to do that nothing perfectly, because your nothing is the wall that everyone else's something is built against. That's what the boredom is for. That's what the clock is teaching you, every long gray hour you can't stand. It's making you into a man who can stand the 1 hour that matters. I'm an old man now. My knees are gone for good. The cold finished them off years back. I've got grandchildren who think the photos of me in the bearskin are hilarious, this young stranger in the silly tall hat. I don't tell them all of this. They're too young. One day, maybe. But I'll tell you, because you've stayed and listened. The hardest enemy I ever faced wasn't the man with the satchel. It wasn't the bomb, or the smoke, or the screaming crowd. By the time those came, I'd already won the only fight that could have saved anyone. I'd won it in 3 years of gray mornings, in 10,000 dull and aching hours, in every single minute I'd stood still when every part of me wanted to move. The hardest enemy was the tedium, and I beat it the only way it can be beaten, one boring, pointless, glorious hour at a time, until the day it stopped being pointless, and the standing still became the bravest thing I ever did. So the next time you walk past one of those still young men in the red and the black, and you wave, and you pull a face, and you wonder how anyone could stand there doing nothing for hours on end. Remember, he's not doing nothing. He's getting ready. They finally stood us down a long time after, marched us off proper in step the way it's done, because even on a day like that the form is the form and there's a strange mercy in it. I remember my legs barely working. I remember the inside of the guardroom, the door closing, the noise of the sirens going muffled. I remember sitting down on a bench and my hands starting to shake, properly shake, now that there was no crowd to read them, no post to hold, no reason left to be made of stone. And I remember Callum sat down next to me, this big daft lad, and neither of us said a word for the longest time. And then he started very quietly to sing. That terrible voice of his. Some old song his nan used to sing, he told me later. Out of tune, cracking, awful. And I have never heard anything more beautiful in my life, because it meant we were still alive. It meant we were still us. It meant the stillness had ended and we were allowed, finally, to be 2 frightened young men instead of 2 statues. I cried. I'm not ashamed to tell you that. I sat in a guardroom and listened to my mate sing badly and I cried like a child, and he put his arm around me and kept singing, And that's the truth of what a hero looks like at the end of the day. Not a statue. A shaking, crying boy being held by his friend. Now, I told you at the start that I'd tell you the real enemy. And I have. The enemy is the clock. The enemy is the boredom, the gray hours, the endless standing in the cold while the second hand crawls and your own mind turns on you and whispers that this is pointless, that you're wasting your life, that nothing is ever going to happen and you're just a tourist attraction in a silly hat. Young soldiers come to me now. I'm an old man. I've earned the right to bore them, and they say it. They say it the way I used to think it. I can't stand the post. Nothing ever happens. What's the point of learning to stand still? And I tell them about that morning. I tell them what I've told you. I tell them that every dull hour they've ever stood is not wasted. It's the forge. Every gray, aching, pointless feeling shift is teaching them the one skill that no enemy can take and no metal can measure. The ability to hold when every part of you wants to break. The ability to be the still point in someone else's worst moment. The discipline that looks from the outside like coldness and is in fact the warmest, hardest kind of love there is. The love that stays at the door so that others can run for safety. The love that does not flinch so that the frightened can find something to steady themselves against. The world is full of people who can run towards the fire. Thank God for them. We need them. They are the bravest souls alive. But there's another kind of courage, and the world needs it just as badly, and almost nobody understands it. It's the courage to stay. To hold your ground when holding it is harder than charging. To do nothing, and to do that nothing perfectly, because your nothing is the wall that everyone else's something is built against. That's what the boredom is for. That's what the clock is teaching you, every long gray hour you can't stand. It's making you into a man who can stand the 1 hour that matters. I'm an old man now. My knees are gone for good. The cold finished them off years back. I've got grandchildren who think the photos of me in the bearskin are hilarious, this young stranger in the silly tall hat. I don't tell them all of this. They're too young. One day, maybe. But I'll tell you, because you've stayed and listened. The hardest enemy I ever faced wasn't the man with the satchel. It wasn't the bomb, or the smoke, or the screaming crowd. By the time those came, I'd already won the only fight that could have saved anyone. I'd won it in 3 years of gray mornings, in 10,000 dull and aching hours, in every single minute I'd stood still when every part of me wanted to move. The hardest enemy was the tedium, and I beat it the only way it can be beaten, one boring, pointless, glorious hour at a time, until the day it stopped being pointless, and the standing still became the bravest thing I ever did. So the next time you walk past one of those still young men in the red and the black, and you wave, and you pull a face, and you wonder how anyone could stand there doing nothing for hours on end. Remember, he's not doing nothing. He's getting ready.